I'd now like to introduce today's presenters. Eric Simonson, Managing Partner, has more than 20 years of sourcing strategy and global services industry analysis expertise. His overarching goal is to ensure enterprises, service providers, and investors have the combination of fact and experience-based insight they require to make informed, actionable, impactful, and value-generating global services decisions. Rita Ensoni is Everest Group's Principal Analyst for Impact Sourcing and Sustainability. Her focus delivers a triple bottom line lens of people, planet, and profit to global services market research, beginning with an in-depth examination into impact sourcing. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Eric.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. Excited to be joined by Rita as we do a little bit of a refresher and hold each other accountable on our resolutions related to sustainability and how we can progress against those in the new year. Next slide, please. So as already mentioned in the introductions, Rita is the expert on the topic that we're covering, and I am a fan of the topics, but will be doing my best to impart a few things that I've learned along the way as we've been ramping up our involvement and focus on sustainability. And so look forward to sharing those with you along with some of the results of recent research that we've been completing. I think it's a great way to start the year and take a big picture view across the entire landscape. To kick things off, we want to go ahead and start with a poll. We'll have two polls throughout the webinar to give us some kind of real-time data. And so the poll is basically for your organization, what are your top objectives at this point? And we'll ask that you select up to 3 of them, and we'll let this run for a little bit less than a minute, and then as we then we'll draw it to a close. So if you can select up to 3 that you would say are your most important objectives.
Yeah, and Eric, this is a great poll for us to start off and kick off the event with, because I think we know a lot of those answers from what we've been researching, but it's great to see what our audience has top of mind.
It's also, I think, impressive. We have managed to create 10 options. So it's almost a top 10 list, which forces the audience to put them to work, to actually read and think more so than a simple poll. Although I will let everybody know our next poll in a few slides will be a simple poll. So if you can survive this one, then the next one will be no sweat. Okay, looks like we're getting close. So why don't we go ahead and share the results of the poll. And looks like from what I'm seeing, the areas that we expected to be highest, 2 of them are. So we have a full 76% saying that reporting on ESG topics is one of the top priorities. We indeed will touch on this throughout, and you'll see this theme come out throughout the different things of just how important getting the facts together are, and what a bigger focus that is for organizations and the providers and others that work with them. The second one that we expected was the carbon footprint, which has over half of respondents indicating it's a top priority. And again, this is received a huge amount of attention, and we're making real progress on it. I'm actually interested to see that diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging is up over 60%. I had not seen that until I scrolled down. We had suspected that might be a bit lower, but it's great to see it. Great to see it in the top 3. Also, even a bit surprised that the Sustainable Development Goals are I think the fourth most popular. So with that, we will go to our next slide and talk a little bit about how we think about the area of sustainability. So we started a number of years ago covering sustainability topics, and then have really tried to ramp that up here the last 2 or 3 years. And I think what's behind that is this idea of we're privileged as industry analysts to be able to see things that others may not be able to see. And so we're excited about this. There's actually a huge amount of things going on that are super interesting that we pick up from our briefings with service providers. We see from startups in the technology space. We hear of internal service delivery organizations doing, and a lot of creativity. And one of the themes that I think kind of comes out as we look across this is ESG and sustainability are really one of a core driver of innovation. And so where do we see this coming from? Next, please. So in effect, what's so interesting and rewarding to us is we're seeing a lot of human ingenuity in thinking creatively about how to achieve new objectives. And these objectives or these opportunities really fall into two flavors. Next. The first is a lot of innovation around the human side of things. In the services space and in global organizations, finding the right talent, finding enough of it, skilling it, upskilling it, et cetera, is super important. And so we see a lot of innovation around not only how to find talent, but how to kind of stimulate the ecosystems and how to try to do that in a sustainable way. And there's just a lot of very neat things happening that that give us a lot of pleasure. Next, we also see this happening within the broader digital transformation agenda, and how as digital transformation has progressed and some of the data and analytics and whatnot, that business capabilities are actually fundamentally changing and can be much more sustainable. We have more control, more knowledge. Still a long ways to go, but another hugely exciting area. So the way this manifests into what we're looking at specifically, next please, is across 6 areas. One of them is what we call impact sourcing, which is helping non-traditional talent pools find their way into work. And that can either be through specialists that focus on these non-traditional talent models, or traditional organizations that find creative ways to incorporate them into their talent pools. We also see a whole range of sustainable technologies and services that to follow with these mandates are required. There's business opportunity here and requirements to help corporations meet these objectives. There's also the whole area of supplier diversity and how to work with the right providers that will evolve in the future to meet the needs and represent some of the social objectives. Then green IT. We're becoming more and more IT intensive. How do we do so in a way that is as friendly to the environment as possible? Back on the human side, the reskill, upskill. Pace of change is rapid, and there are many skills. It's not just a technical skill. It's maybe design thinking. It's maybe analysis and insights. Maybe social skills, relationship and empathy skills. There's a lot of things to help unlock from humans their potential. And as we've seen the last few years, as there's been a scarcity of people, this is only going to become more and more important. And then finally, it's not just about having the skills, it's about getting the best out of people. And that's where the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging comes into play, that as our organizations can do more with a variety of people, that they're really, from a culture, from a fulfillment standpoint, that we're bringing everybody along on the journey in a meaningful way. So this is just a bit of why we're excited about this space and how we see it intersecting with a lot of the other things that we do. It is sort of a new, it has a level of pervasiveness in everything that's going on that is very exciting. Next slide, please. So how we break this down into a few simple concepts that we focus on is within our purpose framework. And to comment on this quickly, at the end of the day, there's really two areas that you're trying to impact. That can be the planet and environment, and the individual people and the societies within which they're in. So all of these sustainability ESG things at one level or another come back to driving change and benefits in these two domains. And so those are kind of at the heart of the framework. We also believe that it's super important to do all these things in a really substantive way, to make real change, to not dilute ourselves into hype, and to make sure that reality is there. And so we have two dimensions along which we think that's important. One is the profits in the business case. Does this make sense to do? A whole bunch of things at this point now make good business sense to do. They're not just a nice to do, they're actually very, very smart business decisions. So uncovering those, helping organizations articulate them, understanding how it fits in and can therefore be a sustainable change is important. The second thing is the governance. And we need to consider and monitor the actual impact. We need to be making sure that as we create change, it's a positive change and we minimize the missteps or correct them if need be as we discover it. So all of this we think is very important for holding together the focus on these two areas of the planet and the environment and the people and the societies. So with that as setting some context, I now want to drill a little bit deeper in and set the stage for specifically what we'll be covering today. Next slide, please. So there are 4 different sections that we'll cover. The first, I'll be handing it to Rita in just a moment, and she'll talk about some of the challenges in enabling sustainability. The next section we'll cover is the sustainability goals and how what they currently are and how they're being impacted by the macro environment. The third section will then be how do organizations, once they know what they're trying to do, how do they actually enable that, both the and the incentives that go along with that. We'll then conclude with roughly 10 minutes at the end of Q&A. We have some questions that have previously been submitted that we'll work through some of them. As mentioned earlier, if you have a question, you can enter them also in the Q&A box throughout the webinar, and we'll do our best to reply either during this session or afterwards. So those are kind of the four things that we'll do. And with that, I'm going to hand it to Rita to start taking us through the first section.
Thanks so much, Eric. Excited for this conversation. If we could go to the next slide. So at the beginning of the year, we conducted a quick poll asking folks, what are your sustainability resolutions? And we call them quick polls because there's just 3 questions. And so the first question that we asked is, what is your major challenge in enabling the sustainability journey? So in comparison to the poll that we just conducted to the audience where you could pick 3, here we said just focus in on 1. And what we found was that reporting did have the largest percentage, and possibly that's because reporting is really the starting point. And regulations and the standards that keep coming out are constantly changing, updating. There's a lot of geographic variation, which we're gonna address today as well. I was really excited to see that sustainability investments rose on the top, even though it's a challenge. The business case for sustainability is manifold. Again, we'll share some use cases of the business case for that. And the last 3, to my mind, are pretty interrelated. When we think about the shortage of sustainability of talent that has sustainability skills and capabilities, when we think about the issues of trust with and quality of your data, as well as getting buy-in from stakeholders that go beyond the ecosystem. So your suppliers, your employees, and other ecosystem partners. So I think in a sense, we are addressing all of this in our webinar today. And I think even the questions that we got at the as people registered, it was really clear that these were all some of the issues that everyone's grappling with. So let's get into the regulatory framework. If we go to the next slide. So, I think this is an interesting depiction of what is happening across the globe when it comes to the regulatory frameworks. The globe is really honing in on what are the governance tools that we need to meet national level sustainability priorities. As you'll see, Europe is well ahead of most regions. The US and Canada are gradually, or maybe even quickly, catching up. Although I did just read a headline, Eric, I don't know if you saw this, but the SEC is actually thinking about slowing down some of the regulations that they've proposed to put out there I don't know if that's economic uncertainty or politically motivated or whatever the reasons. But I think what we've seen is really, it's just delaying the inevitable. As we see regulations going up in one very large market, all of these global players are eventually going to need to comply with all the regulations, like we see with data privacy, for example. So moving on to the business case for sustainability. Thanks. We hear you on the challenge of articulating the business case. But in many ways, I want to just say we at Everest Group have your back in terms of the research and the work that we're doing. We see two major arguments for the business case. First, there is revenue and profit to be made, whether you're creating products or you're creating services that address sustainability issues. There is a demand for these products and services. We also see competition and a differentiation from your competition as another argument for sustainability. Oftentimes, this is about embedding sustainability inside your business, but it still comes up as a differentiating factor. And what I want to also highlight in this conversation is our research has brought up use cases across every single industry. We've given some illustrative specifics here that are in BFSI, healthcare and life sciences, retail, and high tech. But as you can see from these examples, it's really across the spectrum, as well as goes deep into every single one of those industries. And would be happy to talk to people about what they're doing on these and start highlighting those examples. I think I love the phrase that we've come up with of if you could see what we could see. And this is precisely when we get into the use cases that we start to see these examples. So kind of rising back up to the macro view, if we can go to the next slide. I'm really proud of this purpose maturity framework that we've come up with as a tool that companies can use to go up the value chain of sustainability. I realize this PowerPoint slide is kind of an eye test. So don't worry, if you've signed up for this webinar, you will get access to all of these slides and the recording, of course. But I want to highlight what it is we're talking about in terms of this maturity framework. And beginning at level 1, when we think about social responsibility, a lot of us know about this CSR or checkbook philanthropy. Much of it was around having a license to operate. But then we really started to see that sustainability and both its social and environmental issues are often really about mitigating risk and protecting your business. And then as we go into levels 3 and 4, we start to see moving beyond sort of being on the back foot and going to what are the opportunities that are there for sustainability enablement, and then embedding purpose throughout your business. The other thing about this tool is what we've tried to do is go through each of the levers within implementation of this framework. So what are the drivers? How do you measure it? What are the commitments that need to be made? What are some disclosures? And as we know, those are constantly changing, but at a macro level, what kind of ecosystem do you need to create to enable this activity? What are the governance mechanisms? And then finally, a lot of what we research and what our audience cares about is what's the enabling data and technology around actually moving up this maturity framework. So I hope that sort of gives you a sense of, yes, there are challenges in enabling sustainability, but we also see what some of the solutions are in bringing about that sustainability. So I think we can move on to our next section and the goals for sustainability. Eric?
Great, thanks, Rita. So in this section, we'll cover both kind of what goals people are having, but also to what extent they're being impacted by the macro environment. So we'll go to now the promised second poll, which will be simpler than the 10 options on the first poll. We're down to a mere 3. So in this one, you get to only choose one. And the question is, how do you sense that your sustainability goals compare to those of your competition? Are you trying to prioritize it a lot more than your competition? Are you kind of staying with the pack, or are you potentially a little bit behind the pack?
Eric, and I really like this question too, because we do think that sustainability can be a competitive differentiator. So comparing where you're at to your competition, I think is a really interesting exercise.
All right, so I think we're okay. Good. Why don't we go ahead and wrap up the poll and show the results. So Rita, we've got 40% saying that they think they're prioritizing more so the competitors versus 28% saying that we're just starting, and so a bit behind competitors, and then roughly a third in the middle saying they're pretty much in line. How does this compare to what you would have expected?
So I thought actually, it's a self-selected audience. So I thought I wasn't surprised when we started to see just getting started as sort of the higher percentage at the beginning, but I'm pleased to see that really in the end it's either at or above competitors. I'm not sure if that means that the competitors are too low, but I think it's a positive outcome.
Okay. Great. I think we'll, if nothing else, even if people are, they may or may not be optimistic on are they ahead of their competitors, but regardless, that being the largest may represent sort of it reflects the intent of, hey, we're trying to actually get ahead, and from that we all pull each other further along faster. Okay, let's go next to the next kind of content slide. And as Rita mentioned, we had done a quick poll earlier in the year, and this is one of the questions from that. And the question was kind of how is the broader environment, the macroeconomic uncertainty and some of the geopolitical tension, how is that likely to impact your sustainability focus in the coming year? And what I think is pretty interesting about this I'm going to focus on the left-hand side, is the two smallest segments on the upper left-hand side that it's either marginally decreasing or significantly decreasing comprise 17% of the respondents, whereas the significant increase was another 17%. So the organization, so to the extent that organizations are maybe backing away a little bit, it is equal by those who are significantly increasing. And you have then two other thirds of the equation, those that are making no change or those that are marginally increasing, that are holding steady or leaning into it a bit more. So this speaks, I think, pretty strongly to the mindset is one of, this isn't something we try in the good years. This is something that is more pervasive and will need to continue to advance forward. And in fact, maybe part of the solutions to overcoming future challenges versus a constraint that we have to pull along. On the right-hand side, we were able to break some of this by the geography. And we see Europe, which is the light blue, having a bit of a different trend compared to the others. So in Europe, only 40% saying, hey, we expect to increase. Same 40% saying expect limited change, but then kind of falls in with the rest of the pack on whether they're going to decrease or not. Rita, I'm kind of curious, how would you interpret this variation, and what would you speculate is kind of going on?
Yeah, I think what it shows is that Europe is kind of well ahead of most geographies, that they're either maintaining or increasing because they've sort of been there, done that. Whereas North America and Asia is doing some catch up on what they want to be doing as far as sustainability goals. And whether that's a follow on to the regulatory push, or it's just the way that we perceive the world, but it's a positive sign that other geographies are sort of following the example of Europe.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the slide you presented earlier with the map of, it kind of seems like we're sort of on a path towards sort of leveling out some of the variations across geographies. Will still take some time, but it's but the direction of travel seems to be fairly clear.
Yeah.
Okay, next please. One of the other things that we do in our research is we track announcements within the marketplace, and within that are able to look at the ones related to sustainability and how those are changing. And so not only do we see on the previous slide organizations saying, hey, we're going to be increasing our focus, or at least holding steady, we also see the providers in the industry with a similar message. So going through this kind of chunk by chunk, the upper left, we see with the service providers, their announced investments have grown 30% in 2022 versus the previous year related to sustainability. When we look at the actual outsourcing transactions that have been announced and look for components that are based on achieving ESG outcomes, that increased 56% from 2021 through 2022. So both they're investing, and it seems that there's at least some correlation to their business growth also being related to this. And then across the bottom, we look at other types of activities they may do. So M&A, alliances they're announcing, other offerings, et cetera. And of these total, where we see that ESG is still a comparatively small part in some ways, just kind of right around high single digits, but we see a consistent increase. So of the new offerings, it's gone from 7% of their new offerings to 9%. The biggest change was in the M&A, where the ESG was just a component of only 3% of the M&A announcements, and now into low double digits. So again, we think where people are putting their money and their focus is again aligning with this, which will only expand the options for the organizations that are wanting to partner with someone as they continue down this path. Reid, anything else you take away from this?
Yeah, I think we've been tracking this space for the last couple of years, and just the year-on-year growth to me has been really interesting as we track it, and then seeing the variety of activities that are happening as we track this. I think it's all exciting. I think it's moving in the right direction.
And Excel.
And we got a question, Eric, on what do we mean by organic and inorganic growth on this slide? And I believe that's related to the way businesses are growing, whether they're growing the business itself or they're doing acquisitions to grow the business, but just a lot more capacity and capability around ESG is what we're seeing.
Yeah, and specifically organic, maybe say a new offering you develop yourself, whereas a inorganic maybe like M&A. So it's both orienting your existing capabilities and then acquiring new capabilities, new footprints.
Yep. Thanks, Lisa.
Next slide, please. So what are the things that we see as kind of being behind the actual demand growth for this? We mentioned earlier with the purpose framework that we think one of the key developments is that a lot of these things now make fundamental business sense. And so in the upper left-hand corner, there are a lot of organizations are seeing basically their profits themselves can be improved by moving in this direction, whether it be better access to sufficient talent, whether it be more efficient ways of doing things, or even avoiding penalties or exposure to risks that may be expensive to them. Now, coupled with this, in the bottom row in the middle is investor demand. Not only the companies seeing it themselves in their direct quarterly and annual results, they're seeing that the investors are wanting to see them move in these directions and think further down the road than just meeting the immediate financials. And so they're wanting to see that, hey, in 5 years, 10 years, what are you committing to? How much are you going to be able to change and influence your business? And we see this then trickling back into the organizations into longer term, more embedded programs. I think that also is part of why when we saw the chart a few ago about how much were people being impacted by the uncertainty in the macro environment, we didn't see a lot of change from that people were seeing it's going to continue or increase. I think that speaks to these are part of longer term strategies. These are not initiatives that, hey, we need to get it done this year and then we're complete. So both of those things to increase the profitability and to meet some of the investor demands require, at the end of the day, innovation. You have to change up how you're doing things, how you think about things, and potentially achieve the same or more, better, differently. And I would point out, I think innovation, is at kind of the crux of business, and sustainable differentiation comes from out innovating and trying to get ahead and better able to meet needs. And as the market has these needs, this demand for new ways of doing things, it creates opportunity. Now, a lot of that people may initially think of in terms of innovation, in terms of the product itself, the way energy is consumed, avoiding pollution, et cetera. But there's also a fair bit of this that's happening on the people front. As we're in this period where we're having population growth slowing, in many areas, immigration rates have decreased, and we're seeing labor markets struggle to have enough people. We've seen recently China has been passed by India in terms of total population, and if you project the demographics forward, to be a decreasing population here. And I believe the stat I heard recently was that there will be, I think, more people over the age of 40 than below 40 within like 2 or 3 years. And so you start having some real imbalances. This requires innovation in human talent, also in use of technology and automation to replace the demands on human talent. To me, this is actually super exciting. And the reason is not that it's a problem, we've got to figure it out, but rather it puts us in a position where we really need to get the best out of everyone. We need to help from whatever people can contribute. We can't leave anyone behind. The advancement of society, of the economy, et cetera, is now dependent upon really helping people achieve their maximum potential and contribute that. If I think back 20, 30 years ago, a lot of the mindset was almost, hey, there's plenty of people, we can do this whenever, we'll just kind of throw a little bit of work, and there'll be these desperate people trying to take advantage of it. And there may be some of that that's still true. But things are tightening up, and the world is flattened, and people are connected, and people are competing globally, and we can all help each other. And the need for this innovation in what can a human do, can you train them, how can you help them go through change faster, how can you leverage collective knowledge, speed up the rate at which people learn things. All these now become core business issues, not nice to do things that may look good on a plaque somewhere in a building, but rather real business demands that people will lean into. The way I described this is, we for a long time have used the word human capital, but we don't treat the humans like they're actually capital. Now we're going to have to start to actually think of them and manage them with the sophistication of actually, okay, this is capital to be developed, to be deployed. So those are a few of the things behind it. You can read other of the points for yourself. Now going back into like specifically what are organizations doing to enable this. On the next slide, please. So we were able to look at a whole range of sustainability initiatives and kind of what's behind it from a technology standpoint, and the services implemented. And you'll see that there's two things that dominate this at this point. It's the AI and data analytics and the cloud based things. And together, those are nearly 60% of the entire data set. In many ways, these are pretty basic things. And this, I think, goes back to a lot of what we saw in the poll we took with this group, in the quick poll as well, where people are focusing on you're just getting the reporting going, getting the education going, et cetera. There's still a long ways to go. And so there's a lot to work on in these fairly basic things. Again, the analytics, getting the data availability, all of these are helpful. Things like blockchain, digital twins, yes, people are experimenting with those, and those will likely continue to grow, but they're a bit more sophisticated than a lot of the base foundations that organizations are still trying to put in place. With that, I'll wrap up kind of my contributions and kind of what's driving the demand, and hand it to Rita to talk about how the market is talking about this.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I feel like all the data that you just presented was all really positive news. And if we could go to the next slide, we want to highlight that there's a difference that we're seeing in media. The media is fueling fears about the movement, in contrast to our findings, at least. The economic uncertainty certainly plays a part, politics possibly, but also that there's hard work that's involved in change. And the headlines are real. They equate collusion, and they equate collaboration with collusion as one of the challenges. Gutting the enabling functions such as DEIB professionals that would actually make the business case true. And in many ways, I think there's this automatic knee-jerk business reaction to regulations and to resist more regulations. And finally, I think I think the last headline is almost like hearing people just throwing up their hands and saying, this is hard. We're not sure where to go from here. And we wanted to put this out there into our conversation because we know that those headlines are there, but the data doesn't support it, that there's really a lot more that's happening to remain positive and optimistic. And in addition to that, there's a lot more collaboration and activity. And sort of to give you an example of that, I'd like to go to the next slide. As a contrast to those media eyeball grabbing headlines, doing good does have a business case. And I think President Clinton says it better than me. So let's watch the short clip and then we'll talk about this.
The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed a national workforce in need of stability. Unemployment levels soared early in the pandemic, and even when businesses began humming again, we saw a mismatch of skills and job openings. While businesses seek an engaged and reliable workforce, many people, particularly in marginalized communities, are excluded from work opportunities that offer them dignity and a decent livelihood. Today, I'm proud to announce a commitment by Everest Group to address this employment challenge in the global services industry. Together with its partners, Everest Group will help businesses hire, train, and retain a more stable workforce through impact sourcing, the hiring of traditionally marginalized workers, including women, young people, economically and socially disadvantaged individuals, and people who are underemployed and unemployed.
We are so honored to lead this global movement to create good jobs and career paths for people from marginalized communities. I am literally inspired every day by the amazing companies that are empowering individuals, everyone from refugees to people with disabilities, solo parents, ethnic minorities, and so many more groups and communities that are specific to the locations where these folks are working or have other circumstances. This work is happening across the globe in both developing countries and the developed countries. And, you know, this is really, we wanted to share this information as a call to business to join the movement. We know that some of you on the call are actually buying sourcing services. So ask your providers to embed this into their delivery and join the movement. And then there's a lot of providers that are out there that are experimenting with DEIB initiatives and not necessarily thinking about this sort of extreme version of inclusion. Happy to be part of a conversation to grow those. And we also know that there's a lot of enablers that are helping. I mean, we talked about it earlier about the ecosystem, but they're helping us as a industry access non-traditional talent and make a bigger movement out of this. I think there's a lot of potential. And, you know, Eric, you've been with me on this journey for almost a decade in thinking about it. And, you know, do you have a comment or any viewpoint on where we're at with this?
So I think the innovation is reaching kind of a peak. It has been turbocharged by the pandemic. Interestingly, the whole Zoomification of how work can be done and what comfort levels that's given, I think is great. I also recall 6 years or so ago, the whole idea of, hey, will automation and AI remove the need for humans? And I think what we've seen is actually it's increased it in some areas. We need to have training data. We need to be able to, new use cases are emerging. And it's in some ways why I spoke with hopefully what came across as some passion about the need to solve talent problems is we seem to be on a path where an advanced society actually needs more humans than it can produce and really getting the best out of everyone, making them as productive as possible and using them for what they're uniquely capable of seems like a mandate. So, or I'm sorry, kind of an unavoidable truth. So yeah, I'm really glad these organizations are raising their hand. I look forward to seeing others as we collectively try to raise awareness on this and advocate to the market.
Yeah. And I think David asked this question early on in our conversation about hiring remote talent globally. Can it benefit companies' ESG agendas? I'm not sure if he had impact sourcing as part of that, part of the answer to that question, but that's certainly part of it, right? The access to talent because of the Zoomification and seeing that it is possible to do this work wherever on the globe.
Yeah. Let me just add to that. So I think it opens up a lot of things, and that will be good. However, humans still benefit from being around humans in the sense of belonging, et cetera. And so there are things that will need to be that there'll be innovations we'll need to discover. So one of the players on this page, actually the chance to visit them in Nepal a number of years ago. And what they did, they were a very distributed workforce, but they had an innovation that when people would join, they would join and they'd be assigned to a group. In fact, actually, they would be hired as a group, and they needed to continue to meet with each other periodically in person to learn from each other, to develop community. And this was partially, it accelerated the development of people, but it also helped ease retention challenges, and then also helped people assimilate better. So kind of the idea that you're not just either a whole company or you're individuals, but you are subgroups within the company, and how do you foster that as a leverage point for community and learning? Yeah, I think is great, but we're super new on applying things like that.
Yeah, I think that's right. So before we get into the next result, the third poll question, I'd like to go to the next slide and make a special offer to all of the folks that are participating on this webinar. You'll see in the webinar chat a link to a complimentary analyst inquiry session. And this is to discuss sustainability. And you'll see when you click on that there are a couple of options. We've recently launched a full-fledged focus on sustainability technology and services. Happy to do a briefing on that. We'd also love to talk to you about impact sourcing and the Clinton Global Initiative, and if there's some scope of participating in that. And then if you're not even really sure if you're part of that 28% that was just at the beginning of the sustainability journey, happy to also have that kind of conversation of a more general briefing on where you're at in the sustainability journey. And so again, that's in chat for folks that I think we used to put that as a pop-up. So now it's in chat. So just in case you're missing it, please do click there. And also do feel free to reach out to Eric and I. Our emails are going to be on the upcoming slides as well. So moving on to our final quick poll question. And as we said, quick, right? The last poll question that we asked was, how are you enabling or incentivizing sustainability within your area of influence? Eric, what do you think of these poll results?
Yeah, so I find it interesting that nothing is super high. People could select multiple things, and so people have kind of spread that around. There is, I think, a lot of the emphasis on the basics. So the first three that are the largest, again, reporting, understanding the metrics is important. Internal education, helping people understand the definitions, how things apply, helping them think differently. And then finally, you're working with peers in industry to both understand and innovate. We've actually seen a lot of interesting things happen on the internal education. There've been a couple organizations where their leadership and sustainability has written books that have been not only helpful for their organization, but can be good resources for others. I would call out both Peter Lacey of Accenture and Corey Glickman of Infosys as two to potentially consider for your organization if you want something to pass around and talk about. Next slide, please. So when you start figuring out how to act, there are kind of four different pieces we see that typically you need to work against. I'm going to start in the bottom left-hand corner and go through these quickly. First, a lot of things that may be the first kind of moment of truth pushing an organization for maybe, hey, the regulatory scheme is changing, industry bodies are committing to things. And these are both places where people need to become aware, but they also need to participate and help shape and refine things as they advance. The second thing people often think about is, well, heck, I can't do all this myself. Who can help me? And so they start thinking of, hey, may there be a sustainability advisor or consultant? Can my service providers help me on some of these systems or tracking? How does it impact the guts of my organization? How does it impact my digital transformation journey? So there's a whole range of these kind of working with other experts to figure out how to incorporate it. Following out that is sometimes the need for a lot of data, information that helps people make better decisions, compare. These can be very unique to different industries, or they can be general across, office supply providers, et cetera, and kind of what's their carbon footprint, kind of how are they rated. So having the data that's not only your internal data, but external becomes important. And then finally, there are a lot of enablers out there that some of them have existed for quite a while and are just now really seeing things nicely accelerate. Others are newer, but things that may be helping on talent ecosystems, doing other things to help, particularly on social dimensions of financial inclusion, responsible sourcing. These can either work maybe with traditional providers, they may work separately, but they're sort of at the hard edge of creating change that's maybe beyond the digital transformation. Read, anything you would call out on this slide?
No, I think this sustainability ecosystem is evolving. We could probably add more acronyms to this list as well, but which makes for a little bit of confusion. But I think what it's ending up doing is really putting in a lot of hand-holding and tools like the frameworks that we've talked about as well to enable sustainability in businesses. So we do it, again, it takes a village to make this happen. So I think moving on to the next slide and sort of the final framework that we want to share is that and to me, this is very powerful. We already know about how to do carbon footprints. We know what scope 1, 2, and 3 are when it comes to the environment. Our framework here, our contention viewpoint is that this exact same frame can be applied to social. And then you'll have what we're saying is a holistic sustainability footprint. So scope 1, we know those are emissions from your facilities. But we're also saying it's care for your own people. Who's working with you? What are your fair labor practices? What's diversity of your workforce? Because we know with diversity comes a bunch of business benefits. Scope 2 are the emissions that you control or that you purchase. So your electricity bill. And on the social side, it's the people's, it's the service providers and people that whose services you're procuring. So this is where impact sourcing and supplier diversity and the welfare of your contractual labor sits squarely in scope 2. And scope 3 are the emissions that you can influence. And on the social side, it's really the whole rest of people and stakeholders that you're impacting by your products and services. So this could be communities that are procuring your products or affected by where you're creating your products. This could be other vendors that you're working with, other suppliers, where there's people throughout that value chain and supply chain. And also like thinking about underserved markets as well. So we think that this is a really interesting way to view this very ubiquitous frame of scope 1, 2, 3 and make it more holistic. And hopefully all of these frameworks and ideas have been really useful and will support you on your journey for sustainability. I think just before we get into the Q&A, which I think is fast approaching, we only have 6 minutes. If we can go to the next slide, actually skip a slide and go to the second to the last. There we go. I just want to get into sort of closing comments, Eric, and I think we have a bunch of questions that are in the Q&A, and we got a lot of questions at the beginning, so we're going to try to get to those. But before we do that, we wanted to think about some lofty expectations for the coming year to 2 years. We know that the impact of the pandemic has been huge. We know that there's been social disruptions that are also very huge. All of those things are really pushing the envelope on what we think and hope will be the future, at least for the next couple of years. First of all, talent for sustainability. And this is about sustainability not being in the purview of just one department or one chief sustainability officer, but saying that it will become a soft skill. It's literally going to be something that's embedded into every single job and social entrepreneurship, as I like to call it. Second, we think using sustainability to weather this uncertainty is a great way to embrace sustainability goals. third, the rising importance of social, and I think we saw that right away in our Q&A as well. And finding really creative ways to measure that. One of my friends on the call right now likes to talk about non-financial reporting as being harder to measure. We know that, and we understand that they've figured it out on the environment side, so we're going to figure it out on the social side. And then finally, reimagining capitalism, or just having a new vision of capitalism where purpose is embedded in business. We have economies that are inclusive, and there's more of a stakeholder capitalism versus a shareholder capitalism. We see these as things to look forward to, and our predictions for the next year to 2 years. And Eric, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you to manage our Q&A. I see more questions have been popping in.
Yeah, so thanks. We have 2 or 3 minutes here. I'm going to cover a few things quickly. So you will get an email after this to a link to the recording, download the document, etc. Rita, I'm not going to have us flip to the other slides, but we have some things on the research that we have done or will be doing. Can you maybe comment on just one thing that you think either we have done recently or is upcoming that you'd call out for people to be aware of?
Sure. Yeah. And actually, I put that in one of the answers to the Q&A questions. We're very excited about a new peak matrix analysis that we're doing that's going to focus in on net zero consulting services. And we're thinking about this as net zero plus. So, pretty much all of the environmental impact that we see consulting companies embracing, and seeing technology as an enabler in that. And this is really building off of a peak that we did last year, and we'll be repeating this year on sustainability technology enablement.
Okay, great. All right, picking up on some of the questions. One, why do you think health, lack of well-being, and retention is not seen as a top concern from a social responsibility perspective?
Yeah, and I think that's really embedded in ideas around sort of the impact sourcing and the responsible sourcing concepts. I do see those as embedded, and they are concerns from a social sustainability perspective. I think, it also kind of gets back, Eric, to your comment about human beings being treated in the same way that we think of as financial capital, and really embracing the need that they are a valued resource. And yeah, I actually disagree that it's not a top concern. It certainly is.
Yeah, I guess I would add, I made a point maybe halfway through the webinar that we haven't really become very scientific about how we think about the talent. We understand for a manufacturing plant, if you don't maintain something enough or run it too fast or too long or something, you can predict failure. We have kind of nothing similar for humans. It's kind of like you wait for a problem and then you react to it. And being able to help keep humans happy and healthy, there's probably a pretty good business case on that. We just don't fundamentally have the ability to appreciate in the way we will. There was another comment about in response to what you presented, a slide about media and kind of some of the fear stoking, and it was having data to silence those fears would be very useful. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think when you get the deck, you'll see more of the research that we've done and are doing, but I definitely direct you to our blog page, our reports portal. If you're not registered on our reports portal, please, it's free to register, and there's a lot of really interesting content on there. Some of it is complimentary, especially a lot of the work that we've done around impact sourcing. So there's a lot of data there that can help you. And if there's anything that's missing that would help you in making arguments for the work that you want to do under sustainability, we're happy and excited. We have a lot of content.
Okay. With that, I think we're just a hair over. We'll thank everybody for your time, and we'll look forward to following up on things we didn't get addressed during the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.